ending some trade ties with China, including cooking oil imports. Trump has said that the United States can easily produce cooking oil itself and does not need to buy it from China. He has also accused Beijing of deliberately hurting American soybean farmers. The United States is one of the largest producers of soybeans globally. China has significantly reduced imports of U.S. soybeans in response to Trump's aggressive trade war. Instead, the Chinese have secured deals for large quantities of soybeans from Brazil. This comes as trade tensions between the two countries flared up last week when Beijing has imposed extra export rules on rare earth products. Despite escalated tensions, President Trump and Xi Jinping are expected to meet at the end of the month in South Korea, according to U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent. Now for this discussion, we're joined by Ross Feingold. He's a political analyst, joins us live from Taipei. Thank you, Ross, for joining us again. Good to see you. Now, what else is on the table for U.S.-China discussions on trade? Also looking at this soybeans?
Certainly soybeans and China's purchases of agricultural products are a very important issue for President Trump for a number of reasons. One, he's pledged to reduce the trade deficit. And two, a lot of the states that export these agricultural products are states that voted for President Trump in the presidential elections. So agricultural products are really a key issue. And China, of course, is going to bring up the technology restrictions imposed on semiconductor chips, semiconductor manufacturing equipment, restrictions on certain Chinese technology companies buying U.S. tech products. So each side certainly has a number of issues related to trade beyond just tariff rates, and now we have these port fees. So the trade agenda is very lengthy, and I would expect President Trump to only want to talk about trade. And that's a big difference from his predecessors when they would meet with their Chinese counterpart. There'd be other issues on the agenda like Taiwan or Xinjiang or Tibet. Chinese side might bring up those issues, but I wouldn't expect President Trump to bring up issues other than trade.
And is there, among these two countries, does China have upper hand here as, you know, China exports more than imports from U.S.?
That's very much in flux at the moment. You know, if we look at just the news of the past few days with China's restrictions on rare earth exports, you know, that's certainly a concern for a number of different U.S. industries that actually do need those raw materials for use in different kinds of products. But more broadly, both sides are looking to diversify. China has become less reliant on the U.S. market as an export destination as it tries to expand its exports to other places around the world, whether that's Europe or Southeast Asia or Africa. And the U.S. Has encouraged manufacturers to move manufacturing back to the United States, or at least move it to other locations such as Vietnam or India, and not to manufacture in China. So to some extent, they are not as reliant as they used to be on each other. But on the other hand, again, there's still some very key industries and key products like rare earths where there is still a high degree of entanglement between the two economies.
And do you think that China is, like we heard that China is looking into Brazil and Argentina for to get soybeans from there? Do you think China is looking towards BRICS to replace U.S. trade? What do you think?
But we have to be careful about making long-term predictions about how all these issues might turn out. The fact is, U.S. agricultural products, including soybeans, have been sold into China for decades. Chinese buyers are happy with U.S. product. They're happy with the quality. They're happy with the price. They're happy with the logistics arrangements. So that's actually been a productive relationship for both sides. Obviously, there's tensions. It's arising from tariff rates and other bilateral disputes. But if it was up to the farmers in the U.S. and the importers in China, they would probably want to continue that trade. So, will China completely replace U.S. soybeans with Brazilian or Argentinian soybeans? Unlikely, even though in the short term, China looks set to buy from sources other than the U.S.
And now, shifting focus, what are the potential economic and diplomatic consequences of this Trump administration's plan to ban Chinese flights over Russia on U.S. routes?
And that's been a real concern for U.S. airlines because they can't fly over Russia. It puts them at a competitive disadvantage versus the Chinese airlines that could. So this issue has been going on for several years after the war in Ukraine started and U.S. airlines stopped overflights of Russian airspace. It'll probably make flying on Chinese airlines more expensive on routes between China and the United States. China is going to complain about it, but if they want to fly into the United States, they're going to have to comply with United States rules. And yeah, the cost of flying between U.S. and China might go up subsequently, but I don't see China doing much to oppose this. I mean, they might retaliate against U.S. airlines, deny some landing slots at Chinese airports, or some kind of retaliatory action like that, which would create a real back and forth between the two sides with regard to the airline industry and passenger flights. But generally speaking, I think the U.S. Is going to do this. It's an easy action to take, and then we'll see what China does to respond.
With that, I would like to thank Ross for sharing that insight. Please stay with us as we come back to you for our next news as well. Now, meanwhile, South Korea's Industry Minister and Chief Presidential Secretary for Policy will visit the U.S. tomorrow for follow-up discussions on reducing tariffs on South Korean goods. The move comes after significant progress was reported in talks over tentative agreement. South Korea's finance minister expressed optimism, highlighting huge progress in finalizing the deal. These negotiations are part of a broader effort to ease trade tensions and boost economic ties between the two nations. Now we go back to our guest, Ross Feingold. He's a political analyst, joins us live from Taipei. Thank you, Ross, for staying with us. Now, what are the potential economic benefits for both South Korea and U.S. if a trade agreement is finalized soon?
An important part of the trade agreement between the two sides was greater access for U.S. products to South Korea, as well as a commitment by South Korea to make an extraordinary large dollar amount of investment into the United States. Now, obviously, the two sides are still working out the details about how those investments will actually be structured, and who knows when they'll actually be made. But generally, this was a good deal for the United States. And of course, for Korea, although they're paying higher tariffs than they did in the past, the tariffs are not as high as they could have been or as President Trump had threatened. So assuming they resolve the remaining issues, it gives some stability to a very important bilateral relationship. Obviously, the relationship is centered not just on trade, but on security as well. So one could look at this as a win-win once all the details are worked out, but we're not there yet on the details.
Right. And how might the outcome of the South Korea-U.S. tariff negotiation impact broader global trade relations, especially with major trading partners like China?
Well, there's a distinction there because for friendly, I'll call them friendly countries, whether that's South Korea, Japan, the European Union, the United Kingdom, kind of the framework of deals with the Trump administration are similar. These countries had to accept higher tariffs on their exports to the United States. They had to remove barriers to U.S. products entering their markets that the United States government had long complained about, long before President Trump became president. And in many cases, these countries, including the European Union, had to commit to make large investments in the United States. That applied well, and that framework worked well with friendly countries. But when it comes to China, obviously the trade relationship has become so contentious, and there's a number of different issues in the mix, including the technology export restrictions from the U.S. side, the rare earth export restrictions from China side. Um, it's just not as simple as using the model that worked for South Korea, Japan, and the European Union. So it's kind of difficult to take lessons from the South Korea or Japan or EU or UK trade agreements and say that this could be directly applied to the U.S.-China trade relationship.
And lastly, given South Korea's optimism about the progress, what role does this two ministers or two individuals going to U.S. for these discussions play in achieving these agreements?
Again, there's still a lot of details that need to be worked out. Now, President Lee, when he visited President Trump at the White House in August, in late August, that meeting went very, very well. President Trump seemed to be very happy. They seemed to establish a good personal relationship, which is extremely important when foreign leaders are trying to deal with President Trump. And so there was a lot of optimism coming out of that meeting. And then there was this incident with Korean-owned factories in the United States being raided by immigration authorities and allegations that some of the Korean staff were working in the U.S. without the correct visa. That largely seems to have been resolved in the subsequent weeks, although South Korea was really unhappy. But again, the key thing here is, and especially on the investment side, because South Korea has committed to invest so many hundreds of billions of dollars in the U.S., those details remain to be worked out, and it's still going to take some time.
Thank you, Ross, for sharing that insight. Please stay with us as we come back to you for our next discussion as well. Now we stay on China. China and the European Union and several other members of the International Maritime Organizations have reaffirmed their support for ambitious plans to cut shipping emissions despite U.S. threats. The International Maritime Organization is set to vote on formally adopting the Net Zero Framework, the first global carbon pricing system, this week. The framework would require ships to progressively reduce carbon emissions from 2028 or face financial penalties. Last week, the United States threatened countries who vote in favor of the framework with sanctions. Now for this discussion, we are joined back by Ross Feingold. He's a political analyst, joins us live from Taipei. Thank you, Ross, for staying with us. Now, what more can you tell us about this situation with the shipping fines?
The issue is actually kind of simple. Basically, we see that the Europeans are still very eager to pursue initiatives that they view as friendly to the environment, reducing emissions, and they're going to proceed with that regardless of the view of the United States. The previous administration under President Biden supported such policies, both domestically and as well as globally, working together with other countries. And the Europeans know that in many cases, China will cooperate with Europe on various kinds of green, environmentally friendly policies. So they're going to proceed with that. And it will cause a lot of friction with the United States. And we see that with this example.
And how could U.S. sanction threats against these countries supporting framework influence global support for carbon emissions?
Again, like it or not, the Europeans are going to proceed and they're going to have support from China in many cases. And there are countries in other parts of the world, whether that's Africa or South America, which are also concerned about climate change. And they seem for now willing to go along with Europe, and they know that this will cause some friction with the United States. But the reality is, on this particular issue, the United States seems to be in the minority, and the majority of countries around the world still seem to support the implementation of such policies. It's definitely going to be contentious going forward. The Trump administration still has another 3+ years in office, and they're going to be fighting these kinds of multilateral initiatives whenever they are planned, announced, or implemented.
And why are some countries, including China, Brazil, and EU, strongly supporting the IMO's carbon reduction plans despite US's opposition?
That's a really interesting question. The fact is, some of the leaders in these countries, they just genuinely believe that climate change is an important issue and they need to participate in these issues. So that's a very different view from President Trump. Obviously, President Trump disputes the science behind these concerns. But many leaders, regardless of their political convictions, they could be left of center or right of center, but many leaders around the world genuinely believe this. Some countries, they go along because they're in the supply chain, for example. They tend to benefit economically. Some countries want to improve their relationship with Europe. China, for example, they want to improve their relationship with Europe. They want to sell more goods to Europe. So in many cases, China is going to comply with these policy ideas. It's a different calculation depending on the country. But again, it does seem that the trend is the majority of countries do favor these policies, and the United States is in the minority.
Right. Thank you very much, Ross, for sharing that insight. Please stay with us. Now, the IMF has said that rebalancing of China's economy through fiscal measures targeting social spending and property market would help battle deflation, as growth in the country is forecast to slow. China has been seeking to reverse a stubborn slump in household spending as a protracted debt crisis in the real estate market and overseas tumult in the trade sector spooked consumers in recent years. According to International Monetary Fund's latest World Economic Outlook report that noted weakness in domestic demand in the world's second largest economy, where it expects overall growth 4.8% year-on-year in 2025, before slowing to 4.2% next year. The fund's latest advice comes just before a major political meeting of China's Communist Party in Beijing next week, where leaders will deliberate on the country's strategic course for the next 5 years. Meanwhile, China's consumer prices has showed further signs of stabilization last month, as core inflation has reached its highest level in 19 months, underscoring a gradual strengthening in domestic demand. Now we go back to Ross Feingold. He's a political analyst, joins us live for Taipei. Thank you, Ross, for staying with us. Now, how could China's fiscal measures targeting the social spending and also the property market help address the challenges?
The reality is China struggled to achieve this for quite an extended period of time. So for so long, China relied on export growth, relied on a booming property market, which for so many years just kept going up and up. And people mistakenly thought it would go up forever, but that's the nature of a property bubble. It happens in other parts of the world, not just in China. And China has now had to deal with that reality. But for so long, economists and actually other governments as well, they've said, China, you've got to dramatically increase domestic consumer spending. There's too much savings and not enough consumer spending. And China's always struggled to achieve that, especially when they had so much success with exports or could rely on a booming property market. And now policymakers in China are struggling to get people to spend more money domestically. And why should people do it if the economy is slowing? People have lost money on their property investments, then understandably they're reluctant to spend money on expensive meals or clothes or other types of consumer spending. So it's definitely a challenge for policymakers. And every time in recent years when China announces some initiative to spur consumer spending, the headline number might seem like a lot, some kind of fiscal package that's supposed to assist consumer spending, but ultimately it doesn't seem to have a significant effect.
As China's growth slows and consumer prices show signs of stabilization, how should the Chinese government balance its economic strategies with political considerations ahead of the upcoming meeting?
The public is certainly still concerned with the property market situation. So the government really does need to come up with policies that will stabilize the property market. They're also dealing with a rapidly aging society. So one way the government is going to inject more cash into society going forward is definitely going to be within the elder care space. So that's definitely something to watch as China deals with what's frankly becoming a demographic crisis as they become a rapidly aging society. But with youth unemployment still a significant issue and people still worried and really not used to an economy that might only grow 4% a year as opposed to the 8 or 10% that it used to grow over the past 30 years. I think policymakers in China are going to continue to struggle with how to really generate more consumer spending.
With that, I would like to thank Ross Feingold for joining us today and sharing your insight throughout our news. Thank you very much. Now we move on. Deadly border clashes between Pakistan and Afghanistan have reached new levels of intensity, prompting Beijing to call for immediate de-escalation. China has expressed deep concern, urging both nations to prioritize dialogue and exercise restraint to avoid further conflict. The recent violence has erupted after a series of exchanges between Pakistani forces and the Afghan Taliban, particularly in the Kurram district of Khyber Pakhtunkhwa. Pakistan has reported heavy casualties and significant destruction of Taliban positions. Over the weekend, Afghan Taliban has reportedly killed 23 Pakistani soldiers in an unprovoked attack, to which Pakistan has responded with a major counter-offensive, reportedly killing over 200 people. China's Foreign Ministry spokesperson Lin Jian has emphasized the need for both sides to resolve their concerns through dialogue and ensure the safety of Chinese personnel in the region. Now, for this discussion, we're joined by retired Major General Dr. Rajan Kochhar, joins us live from New Delhi. Thank you very much, Dr. Major General, for joining us today. Good to see you again. Now, how might this recent deadly clashes between Pakistan and Afghanistan affect regional stability?
Good morning, Asuma.
Good
It's
morning.
a very interesting question because Afghanistan is very strategically located in South Asia. It is also known as the gateway of Central Asia, and it is bordering Pakistan. It is has a border with China, with Iran, and Central Asian republics, two countries there. So, whatever happens in Afghanistan is going to affect the regional stability of this region, and we are aware that on 15th August 2021, when Taliban came into power, there were allegations in Afghanistan, within Afghanistan, of being a haven for terrorist organizations to establish base. And especially ISIS Khorasan has a strong presence here, and they keep on having firefights with the Taliban. A second important aspect is that Tehrik-e-Taliban Pakistan has become an irritant for Pakistan in this region, and it is an offshoot of Taliban only, and it is a creation of Pakistan. Now that creation of Pakistan is troubling Pakistan no end, especially Khyber Pakhtunkhwa and Balochistan areas. As we know, in Balochistan there is already an insurgent movement on with the BLA targeting the Pakistan Army and the security forces. So any kind of regional instability in this region can affect the CPEC, and especially we see this an ambitious project of China of around $65 billion, out of which $45 billion have already been invested in Pakistan, and there's no going back. So if there is instability there, and what is happening in Balochistan with the you freedom fighters or rebels, as we may call them, who are targeting the Pakistan army, also targeting the Chinese engineers there. So, and China has its important ramifications in Afghanistan also, because China has its own interest in Afghanistan. And we can talk about this later. But since the question is specific to regional security and stability, one more important aspect which will uh, uh, cause difficulties in regional security is that we have seen in earlier days and also in the recent past that from Afghanistan, terrorists are coming inside Jammu and Kashmir also. That was the concern of our External Affairs Minister Jaishankar also when he spoke to Mutaki when they had this interaction in India. So we are also concerned that Afghanistan or Taliban should not give encouragement to these groups there. And we are also aware that a large number of American weapons had also been left here. And a few of those terrorists who were eliminated in Jammu and Kashmir were carrying these weapons. So this entire, if we have an unstable Afghanistan, we have it is going to create an unstable regional environment, and Pakistan is now facing the brunt. India was earlier facing the brunt, and on the Chinese border also the Wuhan corridor, which is a 92 kilometers corridor which connects Afghanistan, and the Uyghurs are there on the other side. So those kind of radical problems China will also face, and therefore it is extremely important that regional stability in Afghanistan must be ensured at all times.
And lastly, what role can China or even India play in facilitating dialogue and de-escalation between Pakistan and Afghanistan?
You see, India will have a limited role because India is not on any kind of a communication, a formal communication with Pakistan. So possibly, I don't think India can play a much role in facilitating uh, bringing Afghanistan and Pakistan closer. But I think China has a very important role to play because China has three core goals in Afghanistan. One is the access to minerals and energy. The second is to protect their own domestic security, as I spoke to you about the Uyghur militancy which is taking place in China. And the third is create dependencies in this region so as to limit the influence of Russia and America. So China can play a very important role, and I think China is playing an important role because China will feel greatly insecure because there are a number of projects right now which Beijing has initiated in Afghanistan uh, with regard to the mining of copper. China Metallurgical Group Corporation (MCC) in 2007 has already entered this place, but it was long delayed because of security reasons. And now in 2023-24, it has picked up. So China would not want its investment to go waste. Then there is an oil and gas issue in Amu Darya block and hydrocarbon deals which China has had with Afghanistan. So these Chinese companies, historically CNPC is there. So they also don't want any kind of disruption. And then on the futuristic side, China wants to expand CPEC into Afghanistan and reach up to Uzbekistan and all those areas. So there is a project of a rail and a road link up to Uzbekistan also, which China is actually working on in Afghanistan. So what I actually see is that China has a full-scale interest here. And also you heard how Donald Trump was trying to get Bagram airport here. So China has been the main influencer on Afghanistan to reject that proposal, because China does not want anywhere America coming near Afghanistan, though Pakistan is trying to give the Pasni port to the Americans because of the rare earth materials, because it's in Balochistan, this port is in Balochistan, and it will facilitate the movement of the rare earth materials from Pakistan to America. So I think that is the American interest there, but it is purely and largely an economic interest and not a military interest as such. So I think these we China wields a great deal of influence on Pakistan. 80% of the Pakistan army equipment comes from China, and we saw in Operation Sindoor, how China has helped Pakistan, because without Chinese help, the Pakistan armed forces will not be able to match India at all. So I think Pakistan is largely dependent on China, and China will wield a very strong influence. And in my summing up statement, I would like to say that there is a strong possibility that China will overcome the Pakistan mindset and try to bring about a reapproachment between Pakistan and Afghanistan.
Thank you very much, Major General Dr. Rajan Kochhar, for joining us and sharing that insight. Thank you. Now we stay in India. At least 20 passengers have been killed and 16 others critically injured when a private bus traveling from Jaisalmer to Jodhpur in India caught fire on Tuesday. The bus carrying 57 passengers left Jaisalmer around 3 p.m. local time and caught fire barely 10 minutes later after smoke began rising from its rear portion. Preliminary reports suggest the fire may have been caused by a short circuit. Locals, army personnel, and passengers joined rescue efforts before firefighters and police reached the scene. The injured were rushed to a local hospital in the city of Jaisalmer, while those with severe burns were shifted by ambulance to Jodhpur for advanced treatment. An Indian origin renowned foreign policy scholar and defense strategist Ashley J Tellis has been arrested and charged with unlawfully retaining classified national defense information. Tellis, a senior fellow and Tata Chair for Strategic Affairs at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, was taken into custody over the weekend following a federal investigation into his handling of restricted government material. Investigators are also looking into allegations of Tellis removing classified documents from secure locations and meeting with Chinese officials. If convicted, Tellis could face up to 10 years in prison, a fine of $250,000, and forfeiture of materials involved. The government has emphasized that the complaint is an accusation and that Tellis remains presumed innocent until proven guilty. Now that's a wrap on the China report. Please keep watching on NewsX World for more news updates from around the world.